Welcome to another episode of The Last Empire, Ancient Mysteries Reveal the Future. We're in for an incredible time together as we take a journey to the country of Iraq in this program. Let's go this program to Babylon's prophetic code. You know, some years ago, just off the coast of the United States of America, a submarine sank to the bottom of the ocean. The US Navy sent divers to see if they could get the submariners out of the submarine. As they were swimming over the hull of the submarine, they heard the sound of tapping metal. And as they listened carefully, they realized that the submariners were tapping a message on the inside hull of the submarine. And this was the message in Morse code that the divers received. Is there any hope? Now that's a very good question when you're trapped in the bottom of a submarine. You know, in the world today, many people are, as it were, tapping a message on the inside hull of our world, and this is what they're asking. Is there any hope? And in our program, we're going to see the answer to that question. Let's go to the country of Iraq, to the old city of ancient Babylon. The biblical writers tell us that King Nebuchadnezzar attacked the city of Jerusalem 3 times, 3 raids. And in the 3rd raid, he completely destroyed the city of Jerusalem in 586 BC. Notice what happens. He took captives, and one of the captives that he took back to Babylon was the king of Israel. The biblical writers tell us in 2 Kings 24:15, Nebuchadnezzar took Jehoiachin captive to Babylon. Now, archaeologists were excavating in old Babylon, and they discovered this ration tablet. It's the very ration tablet of King Jehoiachin. Incredible. The biblical writers tell us that the king was taken captive by Nebuchadnezzar, and now they find the ration tablet, meaning the amounts of food that was given to him when he was a captive in Babylon. Well, one of the captives of the Babylonians that was taken from Jerusalem to Babylon was Daniel. Now, there's a book in the biblical records called the Book of Daniel. And the Book of Daniel was written about 530 BC. We noticed an incredible prediction from Babylon in the Book of Daniel in our previous programs. Now, Daniel tells us in his 2nd chapter that one night King Nebuchadnezzar was sleeping and he had a dream, and the dream deeply disturbed him. Now, we actually know now that the Babylonians put a lot of stock on dreams, because you can see in the British Museum, for example, a dream omen tablet. The Babylonians believed that dreams were some omen of something that was going to happen, something in the future. And so they put a lot of stock on dreams. Now, King Nebuchadnezzar, deeply disturbed, woke up, but he couldn't remember his dream the next morning. He called in his advisors. Now, these advisors, according to the book of Daniel, were men who practiced magic. They were the psychics of ancient Babylon. They were men who practiced astrology. And they were called in to the king to help the king understand what his dream was all about. Now, by the way, the fact that the biblical writers said that the Babylonians practiced astrology was brought out by what the archaeologists discovered. In fact, you can see here a Babylonian astrology chart from way back in the times of the Babylonian Empire. Now, that's why we noticed in our previous programs that the biblical writings are tremendously accurate in their information, historically accurate. There is trustworthy information in this book. And that's why W.F. Albright, that great archaeologist, said these words: "In the center of history stands the Bible. Thanks to modern research, we can now recognize its substantial historicity." In other words, it's historically accurate. To sum it up, he said, we can now treat the Bible from beginning to end as an authentic document of religious history. In other words, the biblical writings are historically accurate, out of trustworthy information. And that's what we've just seen and the discoveries of ancient Babylon as well. Well, Nebuchadnezzar called in those advisors of his, and he said, now listen, I've had this dream, and I need to know what it means. They said, no problem, king. You tell us what you dreamt, we'll tell you what it means. He said, well, that is the problem. He said, I can't exactly remember what I dreamt. But he said, you tell me what I dreamt, and then I'll be able to be sure of the spin you put on the dream. And those advisors said, listen, king, that's impossible. How can we tell you what you dreamt? Nobody can tell you that except the gods, and they don't live around here. Well, he said, if you can't tell me what I dreamt, then you lose your head. Now, that was the way they did it back in ancient Babylon. Just as well, the Prime Minister of Australia and other countries, the political leaders don't act that way for some of their advisors. There'll be a lot of heads getting lopped, wouldn't there? But in Babylon, that's the way they did it. So they were going to kill these advisors, and Daniel, being an advisor, although he wasn't an astrologer, wasn't a psychic in that sense, he was rounded up because he was an advisor to the king. Now, someone has said very well that there are no atheists in foxholes. In other words, when we're caught between a rock and a hard place and we're going to lose our life, we usually end up saying, God help me, and that's exactly what Daniel did. He prayed to the God of heaven and said, God help me to understand what the king dreamt, because I'll lose my head if I can't tell him what he dreamt. And that night, the book of Daniel tells us that Daniel was given the same dream that the king had previously had. He came into the king the next day, and he said, King, this is what you dreamt. He said, you saw a huge metal statue made of different metals, he said. The 4 metals made up this. The head was made of gold, he said, and the chest and the arms were made of silver. The belly and the thighs were made of brass, and then he said the legs were made of iron, and the feet were made of iron and clay. Then he said you saw a stone cut out of a mountain without hands. It smashed the image on the feet, and the whole thing was blown away by the wind. And that stone became a great mountain, and it filled up the whole world. Now you can imagine King Nebuchadnezzar's eyes nearly popped out of his head. He said, Daniel, that's exactly what I dreamt. Now tell me, what does this thing mean? Now before Daniel proceeded to give him the interpretation of what those 4 different metals represented, he told him this. He said in Daniel chapter 2, verse 28, he said, King Nebuchadnezzar, there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. In other words, what will be in the days to come down through the future to the end. And so he began to unwind for him a succession of 4 world empires, or superpowers, if you would. And we're going to trace these now down through history. These were given 2,500 years ago, this incredible dream that Daniel and the king had. And this culminates in the last empire, the final empire. So let's watch with King Nebuchadnezzar as Daniel unfolds to him the dream and its meaning. He said, first of all, King, the head of gold. Let's talk about that. He said, King, your kingdom Babylon, you are this head of gold. Now, the golden head that represented Babylon was an empire that lasted for about 70 years, from 605 BC down to 539 BC, when the next power came along. But gold was a very fitting symbol for the Babylonians, let me tell you, because Babylon was full of gold, it seemed, in one sense. For example, King Cyrus, the great Medo-Persian king who toppled the Babylonians in the years to come, he took away many treasures worth of gold out of the city of Babylon. Xerxes, a Persian king later on, he took away $150 million worth of treasure from old Babylon. And then, of course, Alexander the Great, about 200 years later, he took away 500 camels, loaded with gold from old Babylon. So you can see the idea of the golden head very well fitted with old Babylon. Now let's talk about the city of Babylon for just a moment. The city of Babylon was a fabulous city and a large city for ancient standards. For example, it was 10 kilometres around, 16 kilometres I should say, or 10 miles around. You compare that with the city of Rome, which was only about 9.6 kilometres around, or 6 miles. And then the city of Athens, a great city, but it was only 6.5